On Thursday, Education Minister the Honorable Santia Bradshaw announced that Cabinet made a decision to adopt a phased approach to the reopening of schools next term from April 20th. But even before that date was revealed, we spoke to teachers, parents, and students who expressed a desire to resume face-to-face classes. Now, there are still some questions left unanswered, and that's the focus of this week's One-on-One. I'm Lisa Lord, and joining us is the Education Minister, the Honorable Santia Bradshaw. Minister, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me, Lisa.
You're most welcome. Now, let's start by looking at the last year. If you had to use one term to describe it, how would you?
It's been a difficult year. We have had to adjust in education so much in this pandemic. We had so many plans as a government, as a ministry, and things that we wanted to do, and everything pretty much had to just go on pause as we tried to adjust to having our teachers being able to teach in a different environment, but also being able to make sure that students didn't have too much of lost time in the classroom as well. So I think it's been difficult, it's been challenging. It has made us rise to the occasion to look at different ways of approaching teaching and also different ways of doing learning as well in the classroom environment. I think also we have had to look at all of the inequalities that have been thrown up by the system, and a lot of things that we might have ignored before, we can no longer ignore anymore, and we pretty much now are on that trajectory where we just have to start fixing a lot of things that have been swept under the carpet.
What's been the greatest challenge?
The greatest challenge so far has, I think, been trying to balance all of the various stakeholder interests. You have the persons within the Ministry of Education, you have the unions, you have the teachers, the principals, ancillary staff, parents, students, and then the general public. And we did not have the opportunity to prepare for a pandemic. The pandemic was thrust on us. So trying to balance all of the fears, the anxieties, trying to make sure that we protect the most vulnerable in terms of children who may not have the parental support to explain and to express what is it that they were going through, trying to make sure that we understand that teachers are making an adjustment in this environment in a way that they've never been prepared for. Because I'm sure when they were doing teacher training at Urdiston or overseas, nobody prepared them to operate in a pandemic environment. And as a consequence, it has not been easy. I've said before, it's been a lot of sleepless nights. It's been a lot of conversations with a lot of the various stakeholders, trying to understand and to really balance the various interests, and then to arrive at decisions that, not that are set in stone, because I think this pandemic has also shown us that we have to be flexible, but being able to have and to plan for different contingencies. We planned for school to go back, then we had to change that. We are now talking about the reopening of school in a phased way, and we're obviously making the adjustments in terms of what do we do when that time comes, but also preparing for what if something else happens. So those have been, some of the major challenges that we've encountered over the course of the last few months, and certainly over the course of last year as well.
No, we'll get back to the reopening of these schools. However, a year later, are you satisfied that enough children have access to devices and to internet connectivity?
We tried to get as many students that didn't have devices, their devices. And I think, as you would appreciate, in the early stages, term one, for instance, at the outset of the pandemic, the corporate sector came forward, individuals came forward, and I think we had over 8,500 devices that were donated to the Ministry of Education. People also donated directly to students as well. We had announced early on that we were in discussions with Kenya, the government, and we were looking at being able to acquire devices so that every school child would basically have the opportunity to have devices. And this was well before the pandemic. The challenges, however, came when, because of the pandemic, it then became difficult to get those devices here within the time frame that was needed. And we then had to outsource, purchasing those devices and having to stand in a queue because all of the other countries across the region, across the world, were also competing for devices. So we've been able to secure, I think it's now about 9,000 devices. There are about 3,000 that are due to still come into the country from, I think it's Dell Computers, because it was a large order that we had basically put in place. And we are waiting to pretty much have those come in to be able to deploy. Some of the children have received the devices that we have on island, but the bigger issue hasn't been just getting the devices to the kids. The bigger challenge has been that at home, a number of the children just don't have the support sometimes for parents to help them through the process of the online environment. We've also found that there are still issues across Barbados, and it's not specific to students, but we've also found the issues of Wi-Fi connectivity, and we all experience that from time to time. So children have had to basically battle trying to stay online with the teachers. The teachers have had to battle trying to operate in environments where the Wi-Fi connectivity may not have been very strong. And as a consequence, it has obviously interfered with their ability to be able to learn. But wherever we have had the requests come in for students to be able to have devices, and in many cases it's come through the teachers, it's come through the principals, it's been our outreach to the Ministry of Education directly. We've tried our best to prioritize the students that have requested and to try to get those devices to them as much as possible.
In retrospect, Minister, if you had to do anything different and change something, what would it be?
I don't think that we could do anything different because this situation has been so fluid. Just even managing the pandemic at the level of the national, mission has been, 1 minute you're planning for one eventuality and then something else happens. I think what we've really had to do is simply to just respond in a lot of cases to what the situation is at this point in time. It would be great if we had a playbook to pull from to know exactly how to manage a COVID-19 pandemic, but none of us do. And I think when you look at what has happened across the rest of the world, across the region, the one thing that we've been doing recently is sharing the experiences, month by month when we have ministerial meetings, because it's with those shared experiences that we learn how to better manage the pandemic. But because this has never happened to anyone before, we've never planned for it. We plan for hurricanes, we plan for earthquakes, but nobody has ever sat us down and spoken to us about how to manage in a pandemic. And so we are responding to the number of cases, whether there are spikes in the numbers, and at the national level, government is just having to make those adjustments. And then at the level of education, we also have to make the adjustments that are necessary based on the evidence that is put before us as it relates to the impact on children and certainly the impact on the adult population as well.
You would have mentioned the phased resumption of face-to-face classes next term, which start next month. But it doesn't appear as though you have buy-in from all stakeholders at this stage.
I think I said when I spoke to the nation that one of the things that I don't expect is full consensus. And, it's difficult to get consensus on everything. There are always going to be differing views. I have thought long and hard about what ifs and what happens if something should take place that we didn't plan for. The reality is that when I listen to the children who approach me and say, Minister, we would like to go back to school. We're having difficulty coping in the online environment. We don't have the support at home to be able to keep us focused on the computer, to talk to the teachers, or we simply just miss that interaction. I have to balance that with the feelings of teachers and their own anxieties going back into the classroom. But I also have to recognize that there's a set of vulnerable children out there as well that nobody's speaking for oftentimes. They're the children who, in many cases, may have fallen behind even before this pandemic. And because of all of the factors of the distance from school and nobody having oversight of them, they're falling behind the cracks even more. And I think for me, that is the part that motivates me more than anything, to make sure that that class of students and that group of students, that we protect them. Because we always say we're protecting the most vulnerable. What about them? What about the ones that the parents are not as articulate and able to express themselves, to explain what is happening to their children, the children who are special needs that require that face-to-face, require that opportunity to be in a classroom environment. So this is not an easy decision to make as to whether we reopen schools. We're reopening schools, but what we've said is we're going to reopen schools safely. And that is what I think the message really has to be, that we're not sending people into an environment that is unsafe. Everybody else has been understood that we got to get the economy going. We got to basically do things safely and to follow the protocols. And we've shown as a government that if something happens, then we take action. But we can't paralyze ourselves by doing nothing either. And we can't ignore the statistics that are coming forward to show that the children are losing a lot of instructional time, and it is likely to damage their future as well. So we have to take action now to preserve the children that are in the system.
Phase 1 of the vaccination campaign is now ended. Hundreds of teachers have been vaccinated. There are also plans to vaccinate everybody coming into contact with children at school. What has been the feedback?
The feedback has been actually very positive. I think one of the things that we recognize even before we started this process with teachers and ancillary staff and principals was that some of them had actually already been vaccinated before the exercise officially started. And obviously they may have fallen within that category of persons who may have had chronic illnesses. And so they were able to have some of their vaccines. I think the uptake has increased every day since we started it. We gave teachers the opportunity to be able to have exposure to the drive-through system, as well as setting up a number of different locations which would be convenient to them to be able to have the vaccination done. And I can say, I think as of today, we're just about 2,300 or so. And again, continuing next week, we will have more teachers, more ancillary staff being able to be vaccinated so that when we reopen, that we've at least given them that first layer of protection as they return to the school environment.
Now, naturally, there's still some areas of concerns with children returning to school. What level of assurance can you give parents that their children will be safe?
Yo, you don't know this is your boy Molly, aka Daddy No Land, and I can't reason one seriously. Look, because of COVID-19, everybody online now. But be careful. If somebody online who don't know you ask you your name, where you live, what your parents do for a living, the answer is no. Don't give it out. Don't give your information to nobody. And I mean nobody. Even if it's one of your friends. Answer to share naked pictures, sexual pictures, so no. Remember what posted online stays online. It just end up in the dark web. But don't delete. If you playing a game and they offer you free things, if you come in a private chat room with them, so no. Somebody like that up to look good. Remember, keep your password safe so nobody can hack your account. So no to giving it out when you're in your classroom. Respect your classmate and your teachers. Saying no to posting porn. Stop it. So stay safe and we can get through this together. Remember to sanitize and wear one a mask. And this is a message from the daddy. Big up on yourself.
Now, naturally, there's still some areas of concerns with children returning to school. What level of assurance can you give parents that their children will be safe?
You know, it's funny, Lisa, in this environment, everybody wants certainty in an environment where everything is uncertain. And therefore, I feel that while I understand the anxieties, the fears, and the concerns, the one thing that we pride ourselves in Barbados on is being able to be very clinical when it comes to protocols. And we have some of the strongest protocols in the region. The UNICEF report that came out recently spoke to the fact that Barbados had taken steps beyond what the other Caribbean territories had done, that we had basically, especially in education, we were in a position where we had safety monitors in the schools. We made sure that our protocols were in line with what the international organizations would also have recommended to us as well. So we have not left any stone unturned in making sure that we put those procedures in place. And we will continue to monitor and provide the oversight that is necessary to make sure that the protocols are enforced.
Okay, now the common entrance examination. You've already indicated that no date has been set as yet. There was a date previously indicating that the exam was deferred because of the loss of face-to-face classes in term 2. What is the absolute latest time you can have this exam?
Let's go back a little bit. This examination is controlled by the Ministry of Education, and therefore, unlike other exams, we are able to assess the situation a bit better to be able to determine where our children are truly at. We moved the initial date primarily because we recognized that at that time, children had lost some time in the first term. And we were hopeful that we could return children to the school environment and that they could make up for that loss of instructional time. I mean, the teachers have been putting in exceptional work, going beyond the call of duty, especially for the class fours, to be able to try to see if they could make up on that lack of face-to-face. But the reality is that, we didn't expect a spike in cases. And we were getting ready to return to the classroom environment when we obviously had to close schools for the entire period of term 2. So it has meant that at least 60% of our students had face-to-face in term 1, but the remainder of our students did not have face-to-face. In many instances, they were doing the blended approach, they were fully online, and obviously they did not have the opportunity to be in the classroom, to be able to sit down with the teachers and the rest of the students and do their tests and to see how they were performing or to ask questions. Now, I don't know about you, but I think that we have to give those students the opportunity to get that face-to-face and to give them enough time for their teachers to assess where they are when they return to school before any decision can be made in terms of an examination. We have control over it, but we also have to make some decisions in terms of whether it's fair to the kids who are in that category where they just, have not been coping well. We have a lot of children who have been feeling very pressured by, this whole experience. And I think we have to accept that the examination generally is one that, creates a lot of heightened anxiety for both parents and for students. And many of them, I've talked to a lot of students who simply said, we want to do the exam. The reality is, however, that, they miss the teachers, they miss being able to do the tests in the classroom, they miss being able to prepare in the way that they're accustomed
mock
to.
exams.
And so I really do not believe that we can make a determination as to a date until we are able to place them back into the environment and we are able to make those assessments of where each child is really at.
Could this be the last year for the common entrance?
We've already said, I think about a year ago, Prime Minister announced to the country the intention to move towards the abolition of the 11 plus. And we have already started those discussions internally in relation to how do we make that transition. The hope was that, I think when I came back from Miami, that we would have been in a position to start the conversation with the country, to do the consultations on, what that new system would look like. And obviously then we had the pandemic and we've not been able to have, whether it's face-to-face conversations or truly to start that dialogue with the country. The hope, however, is that over the course of the next few months that we will start to engage. There's a paper that will be going to Cabinet shortly in relation to proposals for the way forward and recommendations for the way forward. And then we will start the conversation about some of those proposals and what the new system will look like. So I don't want to say at this point in time it's the last year, but I want to just say to the country that we are preparing ourselves to make the transition. Every single report that I have read since coming to office about all of the task force that were done on the common entrance examination and the general education system have all said the same thing. We need to move away from it and we need to replace it with something that works for our students. Trying to prepare students for at 10, approaching 11, and focusing only on maths and English, not recognizing all of the various talents, the various abilities that our students have at this point with all that we know is doing our students an injustice. And I keep hearing the stories of students who are creative, for instance. They want to work with their hands. They're interested in agriculture. And we need to be able to have a curriculum that does not make any child feel as though they are not equal to their peers because they didn't score 100% in the examination. I think we all know that it has served its purpose, but I think that if we put our heads together, that we can come up with a system that allows each child to feel that they're valued, but also that they have something to offer, regardless of whatever they determine in life that they want to do.
No, there's still some concerns about the state of some of the school plants. Where are we in terms of renovations and repairs?
When I first came to office, this was one of my biggest issues. The pandemic pales in comparison sometimes to the issues that I encountered when I came in. And I say that because I came in expecting that we could, implement so many reforms, and we were going to be able to do things like reform teacher training and continuing education and professional development for teachers. And we were going to hit the ground running with curriculum reform and introducing, more technology into the schools. And I was plagued, week after week, month after month with issues relating to school plants and the deterioration of school plants that, you couldn't blame the teachers, you couldn't blame the parents, you couldn't blame the students for how they felt. Because if you're asking people to come out into the school environment, it should at least be comfortable. It should be conducive to learning, and it should also be conducive to teaching. And regrettably, a lot of money had not been spent on the improvements to the school plants over the previous decade. So we found a situation where there was no proper maintenance program in place. Yes, there were funds allocated in previous years, but nobody was checking to make sure that the plumbing in the schools was actually working properly. There was no plan, perhaps more so because the education sector was not being given the priority that it should have been. And of course, our position has always been that this is all. We don't have, a lot of land. We don't have any gold. We don't have all of the other things that would oil. We don't have all of those things that might be able to allow us to generate a revenue, but what we have is skills, and what we have is our educational system. And so we've always invested in education. So to not have schools conducive to learning and teaching, for me, was very troubling. And after having, I think, so many interventions where we had all the negative publicity week after week, I spoke with the Prime Minister as Minister of Finance, and I said, look, there is no way I can achieve the reforms that you would like if we don't fix these school plans. And that was the reality. And the Prime Minister, she found the resources to be able to allow me to move from repairs and renovations to about 17 schools, which was the norm, to 41. And so we have increased every single year the number of interventions that we've done at schools. But here's the challenge. To do a lot of the remedial work that is required at the schools, we've been spending close to $200,000 just to make right some of the things that have not been done systematically over the years. Now, if you multiply that across all of the school plants, it's going to take a while to basically make that investment to at least get the schools to a comfortable level. And therefore, we've had to prioritize resources. We've had to look at the schools that were in the worst conditions, the schools where it really, because of environmental issues, it really was not fair to teachers or to students to be learning in that environment. We've had to allocate resources differently. We within the Ministry of Education, there was not a focus previously on making sure that we had a number of professionals who could come in specialist areas, whether it was from the environmental side, whether it was the quantity surveyors, whether it was the architects, to be able to provide that skill and judgment that is required to determine how do you prioritize, how do you assess the school plan and determine what do you do in this financial year. And so we've had to step back and spend a lot of time putting resources behind those things in order to be able to start to make those improvements. And so even as we were about to go back in term 2, I was getting ready to announce that we had done major repairs to St. George Primary, for instance. That is a school that had been neglected for quite some time. And, when I visited, the teachers indicated how difficult it was at the plant. We made a number of there's a number of renovations to the facility, and there's still more to be done. But the process has started, and I think that's one of the takeaways that I would want certainly people to realize. Everything cannot be done all the same time. And once you appreciate that we have started, then I ask sometimes for the patience to realize that we are on the journey to be able to make the environment at the schools a lot better. We've not just focused on the infrastructure alone. Because with the infrastructure, it's the plumbing, it's the sewage that hasn't been touched for many years. We've also looked at the installation of water tanks, making sure that our schools were able to, in the event that the water went off, that schools were still able to function, because we were having a lot of closures because of the issues of the water tanks not being properly connected to the system. We've also looked at a huge investment in our schools as hurricane shelters as well. So you will notice that there are lots of upgrades that have been done, especially at the Category 1 shelters, to ensure that we install the hurricane shutters. We've done work in relation to, again, the additional water tanks at the facilities. And obviously I say all this to say that these are all improvements for the hurricane season. But because our schools are also used by the general public in the event that there's a hurricane, we've seen a number of improvements coming as a result of this particular initiative. And so the work continues at the schools. We've had to take roofs off of a number of buildings. The school in the Ivy St. Giles has had major extensive renovations. That was not a $200,000 job. It was over $1 million. But we believe that the children, particularly in that catchment, deserve better, because the conditions were not conducive for them to really want to come to school. And when you come from a situation as I do, where I see children living very, very difficult circumstances at home, for me, it is important that the school environment is somewhere that children want to go to school. It is critical that if you don't have running water and you don't have the electricity on, when you wake up on a morning and you put on your clothes and you get to the schoolyard, that you want to experience what school has to offer. And we couldn't do that when we first started. So we've had to really reallocate resources. And, I know some of my colleagues are upset because in some cases, I got resources to be able to do this. But I think in the end, everybody realized that this was necessary, because we really are talking about the future of the country. And we need to be able to give them an environment in which they feel proud and that they want to come to school to. And just to say as well, I remember the bathrooms were one of the biggest issues that we had as well. There were some photos that I saw in the early stages when I was overseas. I had people going into these schools, taking photos so that I could still connect with what was happening in Barbados. And a number of the photos revealed that you had bathrooms at some schools where there was no divider between especially in the ladies' bathrooms, the female bathrooms, there was no divider between the toilets. Mm-hmm. These things were not good enough. And we had to put resources to be able to address those issues as quickly as possible. And we did a major bathroom renovation project of the secondary schools, but we also started that as well on the primary schools as well. So our renovations have continued. They're going to continue even now. Mm-hmm. We have plans for places like Alma Paris. We're bringing that back into operation. And the Cabinet of Barbados has approved funds to be able to allow us to start that process for those children who would not have scored over 30% in the common entrance, but pretty much have or require opportunities to be able to, have a skill. And to be pushed into a direction of maybe technical and more vocational areas or the creative arts. We have to cater and to make sure that we restore a lot of the buildings that have been left by the wayside, but also to create additional facilities to be able to cater to our students as well. So will we get to a point where we don't have any issues in terms of the maintenance of the plants? I would love to get to that point, because then it allows me to get to the big picture issues of reforms, of teacher training, of continuing education, of looking at the curriculum. But you can't do it in an environment where every minute you turn, you open the paper and you see a school is closing because, the bird droppings are in the hall, or there are rat droppings in a classroom, or that there are environmental issues. We have old buildings. We have a lot of soft stone buildings. And because we have the soft stone buildings, they require more maintenance than other buildings that have been constructed in modern day. As a consequence, there's a cost. there's a maintenance program that has to be put in place to make sure that we continue to monitor, but equally that we're able to respond to the needs in each of the plants across the country.
Now, you spoke about necessities.
Yeah.
One of the things I've found over the years is that there's not a great enough appreciation for the school meal service.
Yeah.
But do we understand the cost?
People, when I'm here and you see the children that may be studying at home alone, it's on all the way to look out for them. So parents and guardians, if for any reason you have to leave home, remind your children to don't let nobody in the house, especially when no one else is at home. Nobody at all. And neighbors, you all in this too. Look out for the young ones and report anything suspicious. Educate the children. Tell them about the behavior that's inappropriate and unwanted. Tell them that the same way no one is to touch them inappropriately in person, don't let people ask them the foolishness online either. Tell them to tell you, let you deal with it. And don't just leave them all over the place, especially with people that they are not comfortable with. Then things could do more harm than good. But listen, children got feelings too, so don't treat them like the invisible. Talk to them. Find out what's really going on with them online and otherwise. All of we got a role to play in keeping them safe. Man, once we work together, we can see this through. We got this.
Now, you spoke about necessities.
Yeah.
One of the things I've found over the years is that there's not a great enough appreciation for the school meal service.
Yeah.
But do we understand the cost?
Yeah,
to
I
such?
think I think the history of the school meal services is quite interesting in the sense that this pandemic has really shown us how important the provision of school meals really is. And, sometimes people take it for granted. Yes, they're critical, of what the school meals may offer in terms of meals and stuff like that, or that children may not want to eat certain things, or that it comes late at times. And all of those things are valid criticisms of the system and things that we're working to improve. But I think this pandemic showed us how important having that meal is to a number of our children across this country. Some of them were dependent on having access to school meals at the respective schools. And with parents being laid off, with children sometimes not having the things that they would have had access to, coming to school, or even able to ask a friend or a teacher basically looking out for them, it has become evident that we not only have to make sure we have a school meal service, but that we have a school meal service that is nutritious, that is well balanced, and that we start to teach our children, to stay away from the sugary items, that we start to encourage them to drink more water. And so over the course of the next year, the plan is to make sure that we continue to team up with the Heart and Stroke Foundation and the National Nutrition Center and the Ministry of Health and Wellness to start to change behavior, because we recognize that, we can't continue to be the diabetic or the amputee capital of the Caribbean. And it really starts with changing behavior at the youngest age and then being able to reinforce that behavior. So I'm hopeful that we'll get cooperation from our vendors, that we'll get cooperation from, wider society. And of course, parents have a major part to play in changing behavior. But we are working with the stakeholders to make sure that the food that is served by the school meals department is certainly more nutritious going forward.
In spite of COVID, a lot is still happening in education.
Mm-hmm.
In terms of you looking at developing robotics and coding, where are you with that?
So just last year, we made a decision that we would start the investment in robotics and coding. And I know it's not a sexy subject. It's not something that people perhaps quite fully understand. But we believe that we have to create as many different opportunities for our young people, because the way the world is going, the reality is that a lot of jobs that now exist, when this cohort of students leave school in another 10, 20 years, we're not going to have the same type of jobs on the job market. And therefore, we have to look at what is happening globally. What are the changes that our young people are going to have to make? And we have to prepare them from now. And so I think that apart from, what we would have done before with EduTech, I think this is going to be a major transformational program that you're going to start to see in education. We've already invested about $1 million to bring in robotics kits into the country. Those should actually be here by the end of this month. And we've started to train our teachers in coding as well, which I had the opportunity to see a number of teachers in action. And I can tell you that, you know, the enthusiasm is there. And they, I think, also recognize that this is an opportunity to create and to allow children to be creative as well, to find solutions to everyday problems, to see themselves as coders, to see themselves as persons who can create solutions for everyday Barbadian problems, but also everyday global problems as well. And it really is a shift in the way, I guess, our educational system has operated for many years. You know, I have a peeve that, you know, you provide, especially in English, you provide children with a composition or comprehension, sorry, and they are requested to answer the questions. And many times they pretty much look through the lines of the comprehension and they write back the answers based on what the questions are. We want to move away from a lot of that. We want to allow our children to think differently, to question things for themselves, to create things for themselves, to see themselves as being able to achieve, you know, anything that anybody else in the world can possibly do. And to do so in a way that introduces into the curriculum things that ordinarily we would not do. And therefore, while a lot of the older things in the system may still have a place, there are still some new things that we have to introduce in order to give all children the opportunity to be exposed and perhaps to be able to also find careers in other areas than the traditional areas that we would have been accustomed to. We've got the Urdiston Training College, Teachers Training College as well, heavily involved in this transformation. We're looking at a coding and robotics lab that will also not only train the teachers, but also go the step further and work with a number of our tertiary institutions to be able to train them in terms of their tutors, but also to be able to provide the support at the level of the community. Because it's not going to be limited to the children alone, but the intention is that any adult should be able to go to the Barbados Vocational Training Board or to SJPI or to BCC, and to have an opportunity to be exposed to coding and robotics as well. And so that is where the future for us in terms of education is going. We've been partnering with a number of universities, a number of colleges to be able to learn from their experiences, but equally to find new ways of introducing a number of these things into our curriculum as well. So you can expect by September that we should have another set of kits coming into the island, more teachers trained in this area, and start to see, once everything holds in terms of our numbers, being able to see the emergence of robotic clubs at schools and coding clubs. And again, a different way of thinking from a number of our young people.
I'm glad you mentioned the tertiary institutions. There's still some concern about having enough places for students wanting to get into those institutions.
Yeah. We have a challenge with that because we obviously need to revisit, in many cases, the courses that are offered at the schools. And I think recently we did the Jobs and Investment Council report. We took a look at training. We took a look at services across the economy. What are the things that we now need to prepare young people for? And in so doing, we've actually increased the different types of courses that can be offered. Now, with increasing the courses, we also have to now look at tutors. So over the course of the next year, the intention is to look at the courses that are relevant to our people, but also to be able to train persons to be able to deliver those courses. And again, the pandemic has shown us that we don't have to have everybody in the physical environment. Once we have the connectivity issues resolved, a number of courses can actually start to go online. So you will find shortly that instead of having to be physically at the school plant, which is where the issue of the capacity becomes the biggest problem, that we're encouraging a number of the tertiary institutions to move in the direction of teaching online.
So online teaching will be with us.
I believe it's going to be with us for a long time. And I mean, we've had our teachers thrust into this environment. But at the same time, Urdiston Teachers Training College for me has to now become that premier institution, not just for Barbados, but for the region. And so we've, even in these last few months, we've had them creating a number of courses that if teachers want to engage in short-term courses or long-term courses, to understand how to transition in the classroom with the technology, that we've offered that support to them. And the principal and the team, they're very encouraged by being a part of the transformation that we're looking to see take place across the system, because it really starts with our teachers. If we cultivate at the level of the training institutions teachers who are equipped for any eventuality, then we stand a better chance of being able to get a better quality education system. So this next year is really going to be about, providing that support to teachers, teacher training, transforming the Urdeston Teachers Training College, and ensuring that there are continuing education opportunities and professional development opportunities for persons within the teaching profession. Teaching has to now be regarded as, one of the professions that people want to get back an interest in and want to be a part of. It must not be a secondary option. It has to be something that people have a burning desire to come into and a passion to help educate the nation's children. And so we're going to work very closely with Urdeston to really change the approach, the thinking about becoming a teacher, and provide our teachers with as many courses and certainly as many opportunities as possible to improve themselves.
No, you spoke a lot about teacher training. Mm-hmm. In every profession, there are shortages in certain specialty areas. Mm-hmm. What areas do you want to see more teachers entering in?
I have a view that every teacher should be skilled and trained in special needs education. And, we've started the process several years ago, I think, when Prime Minister was the Minister of Education. We've talked a lot about inclusive education. But we now need to drill that down to the bare bones, and we need to make sure that all of our teachers understand how to deal with children who have special needs. We are seeing more and more children who we consider to be on the spectrum. They have a number of different challenges, and we need to be able to ensure that we can teach them differently as well within the classroom environment. And that's very important, because children learn in different ways. And therefore, no child should feel that because they're not able to write quickly and take down what the teacher is saying, that the teacher may not be able to modify the way in which they teach to be able to use the computer or a screen in the classroom to be able to teach in a different way. They may be more, be able to pick up things via listening as opposed to being able to view whatever is on screen. And so we have to be able to equip teachers to respond to different groups of students. Now, there's often the argument that we don't have enough teachers, and that a lot of the things that we're asking teachers to do, could perhaps better be supported by the psychologists or the social workers. And what have we done? We've increased the number of social workers in the primary schools. Those persons are going to be entering the system hopefully for the next term. We've also increased the number of, for instance, safety officers, who they're also tasked with providing that support in the school environment to help our teachers as well. We've also been working with our guidance counselors as well to look at what are some of the issues within the classroom environment, what are some of the things that they're encountering, to provide further support for the teachers. But it has to be a whole school approach. It has to be a whole of ministry approach to dealing with a lot of these issues in terms of providing support for our students and providing support for teachers as well. We have spent a lot of time in the last year improving the student support services department. And why? Because there is a recognition that a lot of our kids are coming with social and emotional issues. They're coming with learning challenges. And if you don't strengthen, while you're doing all the maintenance issues at the schools, if you don't strengthen the support systems, if you don't train the teachers in the special needs education, if you don't expand the ability of our teachers to cope in the school environment, then we're doing our children an injustice. So we've been putting so many resources to, even in this period, to mental health and wellness, not just for teachers, but also for students, because you have to look at the impact on special needs children. You have to look at the impact on other children, and you have to be able to pick up things in the classroom. The only way to do that is to be exposed to the the whole teaching in this area so that every teacher appreciates and understands and recognizes when a child needs assistance, when a child needs intervention, and that we have the necessary support to be able to provide to them once they have highlighted that there are concerns.
Now, during this pandemic, we saw reports of some of the older doctors using the time to go into retirement. Are you seeing that with some of your older teachers?
Parents, guardians, it's your girl Faith, and I know with the children home all day, wanna probably strand out. I know, but I've come with some really cool tips to help us all cope. Look, make it easier on yourself and the children too. Have schedules for time online and time offline. That way everybody gets used to a routine and children know exactly what's expected of them before, during, and after classes. Don't keep quarreling with the children, please. Watch what you say and how you say it. You gotta use positive language, and when you feel that you're gonna lose your cool, just take a breather, count to 3, and then you can tackle the issue. Children need brain breaks too, you know. Encourage them to do something fun every day. In fact, you should probably join with them too. Listen to your children. It's rough for them too, you know. So let them know that you care about how they feel, and remember that COVID is just as novel to them as it is for you. So give these things a try. Trust me. Let me know how they work. It's possible to share in the same space and still remain safe. Once we work together, we could definitely see this through. We got this.
Now, during this pandemic, we saw reports of some of the older doctors using the time to go into retirement. Are you seeing that with some of your older teachers?
So far, I have not. I can't say that we've seen that. You know, we have persons who may have had chronic illnesses who may not have been able to come out during this period, and the public service has made the accommodation wherever possible for those persons. But I think for me, one of the biggest issues that we've had are some persons in the system who don't come to work, and who, for whatever reason, you know, because there may be medical issues and it may be very prolonged, that we've had to look at whether or not we're doing our students an injustice because of the time frame that it is taking to address whatever challenges they may have. Now, I'm of the view that, you know, the loss of time to an entire class as a result of a teacher being absent for whatever reason, right or wrong, is not good enough, and that we have to find whether it's the substitute teachers or the system to ensure that we have persons to make up for that lost time as quickly as possible. We can't allow one person to affect a class of 30. And therefore, I am pushing very much to make sure that the systems within the public service are faster to be able to help teachers who, for whatever reason, have had challenges and need to be moved, declared medically unfit. Let us move them through the system. Let us find something else for them to do. But we can't allow an entire year to pass and children have not been performing at their best because we haven't been able to put the paperwork in place to deal with one teacher. And so that is the move over the course of the next few months. As I said, you know, we just have to balance the interests that present themselves. But the reality is that we got to do our best in the interest of the nation's children.
You mentioned a class of 30.
Yeah.
Is that something we will ever see again?
I have no crystal ball to tell you whether we will ever return to the full capacity. I would love that we could do so. I would actually love that we could break out classes to be able to focus on children who require additional time. You know, when I first came to the ministry again, you know, I was schooled in this thing called individual education plans, where every child pretty much would have an assessment, and you would then determine, you know, what that particular child needed. I think that is where we need to be. We don't have enough teachers in many cases to be able to allow us to put all of that together at this point in time. But I think there has to be a recognition that we may have to pull out some children because they may need individual attention. And our curriculum or our timetabling has to be flexible enough to be able to allow us to pay attention to the children that need the attention the most. So this exercise over the next few years can't be just about getting children out of school. It has to be about equipping our children with the tools that are necessary to function as adults. And therefore, that's why I say the 11 plus examination serves a purpose. But at the same time, it cannot be the only thing that we work towards. We have to make sure that we have children at 10 transitioning to secondary school who actually understand basic concepts, that can read and write. We have to have children exiting secondary school that can function in the real world, that can fill out a form, that understand how to read a document and know how to present themselves when they go into an interview. And so our curriculum can no longer be the static way in which it has been over the course of the past few decades. We've not had curriculum reform since 2000. So we are due for some change, and change is going to come over the next few months.
Let's stick on the point about classroom sizes. There's the argument that that's why the private schools tend to do better than the public schools, because the classroom sizes are much smaller and there is that individual attention.
Yeah. You know, change is always difficult for people, but I do feel that there are some things, some lessons that we can learn from the private institutions as well. You know, apart from the fact that, you know, we have many of our teachers are in the system through the public service in public schools. And so there's certain rules, regulations as to how they function. We also have to be able to look at this thing systematically and determine whether some changes are necessary in public schools. And I do believe that, yes, the smaller sizes are important to our children. And that's why I'm saying that going forward, I think once people become more sensitive about issues of special needs and learning challenges and how to deal with it, then the teaching profession will also be making the call for the smaller sizes or the individualized classes or the pull-out classes. So yes, we have special units at some of our schools, but perhaps we may need more. Perhaps every school should have a special needs classroom, because we are seeing the issues arising at several of our institutions, and it's not just 4 or 5 schools, but it is across the board. So it cannot be that we just pull out a few children and we ignore the others because the class can't fit them. It has to be that we say when we assess, how many children really need this assistance, and how can we maybe tailor the curriculum and the timetabling to be able to allow us to make sure that no child is left behind? Because that has been a mantra of the ministry for decades. But we have to now not just, you know, talk about it anymore, but we have to actually put it into action as well.
No, you always mention the need for parent participation. And a few speeches ago, I can't remember which assignment you were at, but you made it clear that there's need for more PTA engagement.
Yeah. We have been finding, especially through the last couple of months, that more and more PTAs have not been functioning. You know, we've spoken to the National PTA Association, trying to make the call on them to encourage more participation across the board. And I've constantly been indicating to the country, you know, we all are in this together. It's not about pointing the fingers at teachers and saying teachers are not doing what they're supposed to do. You know, because when you point the fingers in one direction, the fingers pointing back at you sometimes as a parent. We all have a vested interest in making sure that our children learn and that they learn the right things. And so parents have a role to play. The teachers have a role to play. The principals have a role to play. The ministry has a role to play. And the general public has a role to play as well. It therefore means that parents can't just decide that they want to send their children to school, but they don't want to play an active part in the children's lives. But that said, we also have to accept that we have parents out there who themselves have not had that exposure as to how to be a parent. They don't know the questions to ask. In some cases, they may not be able to articulate themselves well. They are ignored because sometimes they become what is perceived as aggression, but really it is that they don't know how to express to the teacher or to the principal the concerns that they have with the child. So often I've heard parents say, you know, I know something wrong with the child, but I don't know how to explain it, you know, or the child is slow, using language that we all know is not appropriate anymore, but really, you know, somebody has to talk them through what the issues are. And so while we're talking about teacher training, a big part of teacher training also has to be about how we communicate with our stakeholders, how we communicate with children, how we communicate with parents, how do we encourage parents to participate in the school environment. And it doesn't mean that you have to be the brightest parent, But what it means is that you may be able to give back to the school. You may be able to at least attend something that the child is doing so that the child knows that there is support. And a lot of our kids are reaching out and they're calling for that support. They turn to the wrong people sometimes for that support that they're not getting at home, or sometimes they feel they're not getting at school or they're not getting in the community. And we therefore have to continue at every juncture to encourage parents to just reach out. If you don't know what to do, ask a question. I know my colleague Minister Cynthia Ford is working on some parenting programs as well. And, we continue to partner on exercises to help parents. But we don't want the parents to come forward alone when the children behave badly. We want parents to do this on an ongoing basis where they can be exposed to the things that require them to be good parents and to make sure that children can determine right from wrong.
We know the situation is still quite fluid, but if you had one wish for next term and the next school year, what would it be?
That things would settle down, that people wouldn't just react sometimes without allowing the Ministry of Education to be able to talk them through what we are proposing to do. I think that when I came to the ministry, the tension between ministry and unions was a real one. And I've tried my best. For those who know me, know that I am, always trying to find the solution as opposed to just trying to focus on the problems. And so I understand that people have had difficulties communicating with the Ministry of Education and perhaps the former minister. But I've also said that that's not my style. I believe we have to listen to everybody. We have to consult. I would love the unions to realize as well that I have a responsibility to consult with as many stakeholders as I possibly can and to listen to as many interests as I possibly can. It doesn't mean that they don't have a say. It doesn't mean that they can't express or recommend anything. But I think that having come to office, being able to consult with so many people, we did rubbing shoulders, we held people's assemblies. It is the way that we came to office. It is not to be offensive. It is simply to say, if I talk to parents, I can get a different perspective than if I talk maybe to the union leaders. If I talk to the teachers, I may get a wider perspective than if I have just a select representation of persons expressing their views. If I talk to the children, I'm going to get a different perspective. And so I think coming out of this, for me, it is about getting people to realize that I'm not the minister of teachers alone. I'm the Minister of Education. I have a responsibility to all stakeholders. And after hearing everything, I then have to make a determination and to make recommendations to Cabinet as to what I think are the best things for the nation's children and also its teachers. But what must never happen is that before something is allowed to roll out, before something is allowed to be given its breath, that we try to suck it away, or that we create panic when there doesn't need to be any, or that we create anxieties and fears when they don't need to be. Expressing how people feel is fine. We have freedom of speech. So people have to say, I don't agree with this, I don't agree with that. But what we must never do is to create such fear and paralysis that then we can't engage, or we can't engage without contention. I have been a minister that has tried to reverse, and I'll share this, the very first meeting that I had with one of the unions. I remember it well because the way the ministers' conference room was set up, the unions were not allowed, as I walked into the room, I realized the unions were not allowed to sit around the table. There was one seat for the president and all the other members were either outside or there were like 3 seats left for them. And the entire ministry staff were sitting in the room. And I took one look at the room and I said, this is not my way. I believe that if we are stakeholders in education, we need to bring everybody to the table. I asked my staff, step back, allow the union to come to the table. And we started our discussions in that way because I recognized that there was so much tension that existed over the course of the previous decade between the stakeholders, the union, the voice of the teachers, and the Ministry of Education. And so I've had to rebuild the relationship and to try to alleviate some of the tensions that existed because oftentimes the communication was not as it should be. And I would say it's gotten better, but it's not perfect. And so we continue to work with everybody to make sure that they understand that everybody's opinion is valued. But at the end of the day, we are still the Ministry of Education and responsible for the wider perspective of education and not any one interest.
Minister, thank you so much.
Thank you so much as well.
That was Minister of Education, Technological and Vocational Training, the Honorable Santia Bradshaw, and I am Lisa Lord for One on One. Thank you for joining us.